The FXMaster module has long been an incredibly popular one in the Foundry VTT community, and it's not hard to see why. It's gorgeous and adds a ton of style and flavor to your scenes. But with some really major updates to the module thanks to its new maintainer Gambit, this is no longer the FXMaster you once knew. It is something altogether more powerful, more beautiful, and easier to use than ever before. Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the Bailiwiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes that you can use without any setup, some of which are going to be the backdrop for today's video, where we are returning to our mini-series on the top 25 most popular FoundryVTT modules. Today, as we already intimated, we're going to be covering FXMaster. This is an old favorite of the community, and it is an incredible module that we have talked a lot about and adore. Earlier this year, Gambit of Gambit's Premains took over the maintenance and development of the module, and he has made some really amazing updates in this past month, completely revitalizing this old friend of ours. There's a lot to explore and a lot to learn in these new updates, but it is very much still the same powerhouse that it always was. It's just even easier to use and altogether more beautiful. So come along as we dive into Foundry's fifth most popular module with an installation rate around 33%, FXMaster. To get started with FXMaster, everything is going to be in this effect controls icon tool over here, and that is going to kind of look like a magic wand, and it's got all of our subtools in it. We have just the tools active up here at the top. There's a way to turn that off, which we'll cover in our settings section towards the end of the video here. And then the first feature we're going to talk about is animation effects. If you had used the old version of FXMaster, this is going to look really, really different. So as you can see here, we have this nice big window that has all kinds of animations in it that you can select from. And this is a part of that really big UI overhaul that Gambit did. This is a completely new interface, and actually none of these animations are stored within the module itself. Instead, they index a lot of the most common and popular animation modules here. And so here you can see that I have a drop-down up at the top that first says all animations. When I click on it, we also have custom, animated spell effects cartoon, JB2A free, JB2A Patreon, and Jinker's animated art. Now I only have the JB2A Patreon module actually enabled in this world. The others are installed, but FXMaster intelligently goes through and scans my modules folder to find the most common animation modules. In addition to these, there's also Jack Kerouac's animated spell effects, not the cartoon version, and the Boss Loot animated assets, and finally Wild Magic Surge and its animated assets. So if you have any of those modules installed, then they will appear here as well. Within this, you have all of these different options for the different animations, and if you hover over them, you can see a preview of what the animation does. It's really clear on these JB2A kind of drawing symbols right here. And you can right-click on these to get the properties, and you can have all this information at your fingertips. So you can see what the author is, the name of the file path. If there's a sequencer database path, then it will give you that as well, which can be useful when you're building sequencer macros. And then you can also choose how you're going to scale it X and Y, and also your anchor points. You can adjust that to determine how it's normally going to appear on your page. So in addition to all that, you can also mark something as a favorite, which doesn't really do anything on this main menu, but it adds a dropdown for favorites, which is going to just contain all of the animations that you have selected as a favorite. When you have an animation selected, you can simply drag and drop it to put it into the scene. You'll see after a slight delay, then it will create this new tile. And this is just a regular old tile. You can move it around, you can interact with it any way you see fit. So you have all of these options. It's a lot slicker and easier than the old FXMaster setup where you had this special interface where you could enable and disable things. Instead, it's just a tile. It's nice and straightforward. In addition to the regular browsing features, there's also some advanced search options. You can see there's an example there, but I'm going to give you one of mine. So if I want, say, some interesting kind of magical fire going on, I can use fire and then this logical operator over and in parentheses, it'll make a kind of grouped thought here. So the object here is going to be green or blue. So we're looking for fire and then and inside of the parentheses, green or blue. And then now we can see in our details, we have all of these great tiles and animated options for fire that are only green or blue in the name. So I'll just go ahead and drag these out. And this is also really handy, not only for placing these animated effects on the scene, but also if, say, you're looking for a particular effect that you're going to be using or a tile that you're going to be using or referencing in something like, say, automated animations, and you are trying to specify that custom effect that happens when you're going through that. Same thing with, say, sequencer, etc. It's really nice because you can just right-click, you can find the file path and the file name and the sequencer.db path if it exists, and you have that all at your fingertips. Next, we can go into particle effects, and this may be what you really know FXMaster for, at least if you are a fan of the BetaWiki channel and have seen some of our work. You may notice that this has had a serious visual upgrade since the older days. So Gambit has gone in and completely redesigned all of the UI here for App v2. So this is present in Foundry v12 and v13. You have drop downs for the kinds of effects that you want to use, and all of them are toggled using the individual power switches. Consistent with old FXMaster, you still have to wait a little bit before the effects start coming through, but you can see them start to filter in now. You can also make adjustments by clicking on the names and having a drop down of all the different settings. And these do various aspects here. So scale is the size of the individual elements. So if I double the size of the clouds, that will increase the size. Direction determines the direction that things are going to flow. If you have it at 0 degrees, it's going to go left to right. 90 is top to bottom. Then 180 is from right to left. And 270 is from bottom to top. And then, of course, you have everything in between. You can also adjust the speed, which is how fast the effects are going, and the lifetime is how long they'll linger. You'll notice that some of the clouds are naturally dissipating after a certain length of time. That's going to be modified by kind of a random number or variable for each individual particle before it disappears. So longer lifetimes means things will stick around. And you may want to play around with that and your speed in order to make sure if you want particles to generally be reaching the other side, you may have to tweak kind of the ratios there a little bit. If you have too slow of a speed with too short of a lifetime, then most of your clouds, for instance, will stop before they reach the midpoint. But also, if you have them last too long and move too slowly, then you can have your screen fully cluttered by all of the different clouds going on. Density is how thick all of the particles are, just how many particles are going to be on the screen. So scale is the size of particles, density is the amount of particles on your screen. Opacity is what it says on the tin. And then you can also tint all of the particles with different colors. So if you want to make it red, it will then eventually update there. So while you do need to turn this off and turn it back on if you want an immediate refresh, as you may have noticed, actually there are a few points where it will automatically check every so often if you have this open and you've made some changes, where it will clear out the clouds and everything and will reapply with your new settings. So we can see now we have some red clouds going on here. And I can simply uncheck the tint if I want to get rid of that. And then now we should have white clouds once again. In addition to the weather, there's also some other options, like ambient is going to be things that are just general aspects of the environment, such as the leaves or also fire. And these function much the same as weather. You'll notice that most of the settings are exactly the same. And then for animals, similar situation, you can have animals active on the screen as well. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see the bats flying around. One thing that I want to call out on animals is going to be the animations section. animations are what is affecting the individual particles here. In this case, they're birds, and they all have different animation options. There is a drop down, and you can see that first off we have mixed. This is the default. And we have glide and flap as well. So if you notice the birds, they will kind of alternate a little bit between gliding and flapping their wings, like a bird might normally do. But you can also set specifically glide and flap behaviors. Now, these are options that are applied to individual particles. So by having all three of these options, it means you're going to have a mixture of birds that are going to use the mixed animations, then some that will use only glide, and some that will only use flap. You can also, of course, exclude the mixed option or the glide option or the flap option so that you have it limited to only one of those particular animations. Now, when it comes to customizing all of these things, another major feature that has been added is the particle effects management system actually is kind of global. Not in the sense that it's going to apply to all of your scenes, but if you have a particular style of clouds that you like a lot, for example, you have clouds that you like to be a little bit less dense and maybe a little bit slower, then you can have this setup ready to go where you are applying it to this scene, and then you can go to another scene and you'll have the same options. So here I am on a brand new scene, and if I open up my effects controls and go into the particle effects and expand out clouds, we'll notice that my speed and lifetime and density have been changed. So I have access to this on any scene that I want. So this is really handy if you are a big fan of a particular setup where you find just exactly the way you like your clouds or your fog, your rain effects to look within your games. You can have this configured, and then this is just how clouds are, etc. So this is pretty nice. Now, this does not give you multiple options for, say, like a stormy effect if you want your clouds to be different on there, for example, a lot faster or a darker tint to look more like a storm situation, but it does get you there for kind of your baseline regular use versions here. So this will persist. This also persists through a reload and through updates. Basically, the particle effects management state is stored in your game settings, kind of behind the scenes, so it's going to persist for you. Up next, we have filter effects. And this is going to apply a filter to the entire scene. And with it, you can do all kinds of interesting things. For example, if we turn on this old film, we add some film grain, some of the occasional like streaks, and basically look like a old-time movie or something like that with a sepia tone to it. And just like the particle effects, we can adjust some of the settings for these. They're going to vary a little bit from setting to setting, but you can do this if you want to have some extra effects and panache on your scenes with the fog, or if we want to add a color filter and you want to shift things a certain direction. You can use this to do all kinds of fun things. This is a fantastic way to really change the feel of a scene, whether that's a battle map or theater of the mind. You can have kind of a flashback, use your old film. You can use lightning if you want to have a storm going on and really make that effect feel alive. If someone is falling under the water or something like that, or you're doing a deep sea dive, the underwater effect adds a cool little ripply element to everything. And of course, you could combine that with color to then give this kind of underwater vibe to everything. And you can, of course, combine this with particle effects even more. So we could turn off clouds here, for say, and put on the bubbles. And now we have this really cool underwater effect that can really change the vibe of a scene very quickly and easily. So that's where FXMaster's filters and particle effects really shine, and they're very, very interesting and cool for using in your scenes. Now, if we want to save all of this setup, for example, we really like this underwater effect with this kind of color and the bubbles, then what we can do is we can come over here and click on the floppy disk save icon and save particle and filter effects as macro. When you click on that, it's going to create a macro called particle and filter effects. And if you search for it, then you'll have this macro that's generated in your macros directory. So I would highly suggest changing the name and calling it underwater or something like that. Just something descriptive so that you'll know what it is, because every time you use this macro, it's going to have a very similar start. So this is a good way to keep it kind of straight for yourself. If you're only using one particle or only one effect, it'll tell you, but particularly if you have multiple versions there, then you're going to want to have that saved. So we'll save the macro now that we have it named, and I will go ahead and drop it on my hotbar. Now that it's on my hotbar, we can go to another scene and apply this same effect. So we're on a new scene. I'm just going to activate my macro, and we'll see immediately we have the underwater filter, the color shifting, and we're starting to have bubbles come up. One thing that's really important to note is that when you are using a macro, if we go into any of these effects, it will show as on, but it will not update these different options here. So if I go ahead and I turn up the scale and lifetime for my regular management, and I turn off the bubbles and I turn them back on, we're going to have really different looking bubbles. And so we can see that these bubbles are much larger than what we got from the macro. And if we turn this off so we no longer have bubbles, when we no longer have our bubbles and we reinitiate the macro, we'll see that the bubbles are forming here, and they have different settings completely independent of what was in our manager. So once again, bring that up, you'll see that the scale and the density and lifetime have not changed on the manager, despite them being different values within our macro. Another important thing to note is that if I execute this macro multiple times, you'll see that we're getting more and more bubbles. Basically, whenever we're using this macro, it's adding it as a new effect under a specific type. So while you can use the particle effects management to turn it on and off, you're not going to be able to edit it, and it's going to be overlaid on top of things. So that's an important thing to note. If you already have an effect on a scene and you just want to add something to it, then that's totally fine. But if you already had bubbles and you want to replace those bubbles with your macro bubbles, it's important to turn them off before using that macro. Otherwise, you're just going to add them on top. This can get especially awkward when you're doing things with, say, clouds, where you can suddenly have your screen filled with clouds, because rather than updating or overwriting your existing clouds, you're adding another layer of clouds on top of them. To remove the existing weather before you apply your new one, you can just paste in this. It's going to be canvas.scene.unsetFlag, and then in parentheses, you're going to have FXMaster, effects. And this will remove the weather effects that are on the scene before applying the other macro here. So this is going to kind of reflect the old update weather that we had in prior versions of FXMaster. So now when I use this macro, it will take a moment to clear out all of the bubbles, but you'll already see that we're starting to have fewer and fewer bubbles. So once this fully updates, we're going to be back down to our normal amount of bubbles. Now, when it comes to filters, similarly, it's not going to respect what you may have done in the filter effects management. It's also not going to overwrite the filters. It's instead adding to them. And generally, this can be pretty subtle, but you may have noticed that this is getting more and more distorted and our blues are getting bluer and bluer. So if you're using something with filters as well, then you can just add another line, but instead of effects, we're going to call it filters. And now when we save the macro and we execute, it's actually removing all of these old filters and then reapplying things. So it's going to keep it nice and clear. Alternatively, if you don't want to modify your macro in that way, then the trash can will clear all particle and filter effects on the scene. So this is a pretty good way to just make sure you're definitely starting from a clean slate if you have a macro that is applying all of the filters and effects that you want at the moment. We can see again, once I hit it, then we're applying everything and we're transitioning into that color that we want. The last feature on our hotbar that I'm going to call out is the invert particle effect mask. And this really requires some additional explanation. So with our drawing tools, we can do some interesting things here with FXMaster. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a polygon here. So that we can see we have a polygon here. I can go over here. So I've just left clicked the drawing and I right click to bring up the HUD. Down on the bottom of the left, we have a cloud icon that is Mask FX Particle Effects. So if I turn that on and I go into my effects controls, and we'll go into particle effects, and let's go ahead and do rain top down and some clouds. And maybe also we'll throw in some fog. So this is really nice and clear here. So you'll notice that everything inside of this drawing is not getting the rain or the cloud or fog effects applied to it. It is completely occluded from the weather. The invert particle effect mask basically flips this. Your default functionality with the particle effect masks on your drawings is to exclude things within the drawings and include everything outside of it. So outside of the mask is where it gets applied. By clicking this invert, we completely switch. So it's only things inside of the mask rather than outside of it. So this can be interesting if you're wanting to have a particular effect that's localized to this area that you don't want to use a animation tile for. Instead, you're going to be using all of these different particle effects. So it can get you some really cool and interesting effects and capabilities here. Drawings aren't the only way we can kind of paint with the particle effects and everything. If we go into our regions, we can create a region, and there is a new behavior where we can have FXMaster particle effects, and we can add all kinds of fun effects here. So say autumn leaves and bats, for instance, and maybe even some crows. So we have these options. You'll notice that once I click on them, then we'll have the ability to kind of change the settings on them. Otherwise, it's just going to be the default. So you don't see that information until you actually click on it. Once you click on it, then you'll be able to customize it. So when we update the region behavior, we'll see it's filled with all of these fun birds and animals and everything. Worth noting here as well, if we have our effects on, and if we go back into regions and we make a brand new region, and we make this region have the behavior of suppressing weather, and update the region behavior, we'll see that the suppress weather option will affect FXMaster weathers, not only the kind of source weathers that are available in your scene configuration. Another thing worth noting over here is that the suppress weather effect will affect regions that are defined with the FXMaster weathers, but there may be some kind of hierarchy with your region, so just be aware of that. Generally speaking, the lower down the region is, the more priority it's going to have. So that has been kind of my experience with it. And you can use this to cut interesting holes out of a region that you may have already had defined for weather, as well as blocking things off independent of drawings. Now, if you're not using modules to kind of increase the options you have for your regions, like being able to move them around, then regions may be a little bit more clunky to work with or edit than drawings. You're just going to have to choose for yourself. But what's really nice about using the regions is that you can have very distinctly different weather options. For instance, we have the weather that's going over the entire scene right now with the top-down rain and the fog, and that's independent from all these animals skittering about on this tower. If you were just using the drawings to either mask or invert the mask, you would be stuck with one array of options of effects. Those effects would be either only inside the drawing or always outside the drawing, depending on what you picked. But if you had several drawings, they would all have the same effect. With regions, you can have regions with different options attached to them. Finally, with the suppress weather and the masking as well, we can see if we do another drawing and turn on the masking property, if we go into our filters and we do that old film effect, you'll see that the old film effect will still persist. It is not suppressed by weather or the masking. Filters in general apply to just your entire field of vision when you are on the scene. You could even see the kind of blank padded area is being affected. So the filters are going to supersede everything. They are not obeying your masks or anything like that. They apply to your entire screen whenever you're on that scene. So keep that in mind. You can't restrict the filter to just one area. Now that we have covered the different functionalities of FXMaster, let's dive into the settings. You don't really need to know about all of them in general for daily use, but there's a few things that will be helpful as utilities. So first, I have these crazy red clouds going, and I don't want the clouds to be red anymore. I could kind of fuddle around and try and get back to the base point that I had for the clouds, and then work from there to get exactly what I want for this scene, and also for my other scenes. But there's also an easier option. If I go into the game settings, and I'm going to look for Gambit's FXMaster, and you can see that we have a few different options here. So first we have this reset particle and filter parameters. And if we hit save changes on that, we're going to get a little pop-up. And we can see if I go to my particle effects, the clouds are going to be normal again. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to overwrite all the particle effects you have already going on your scenes. You are going to have to change those if you want to, which is also a good thing because you're not erasing your progress there. But now the next time you go to mess with things on your particle effects management, it's going to start from that baseline here. So we can adjust this a bit. So now we've got my properly stormy effect that does not have the crazy red clouds, and you can do that at any time to go back to those default settings here. Returning, there are a few other pieces. So enable effects is kind of what it says on the tin. It's whether or not the effects are even going to work. And it will hide those. Those are going to be on an individual basis. So you can turn that off if, say, your particular machine has poor performance, or you can have this set up for your players, especially using something like Monk's player settings, where you can specify what player settings you're modifying, and you can turn it off for the people who have maybe lower end systems that have a bit more of a hard time performance-wise with things. We'll come back to the custom animations and refresh animations database in just a moment. The next setting we have is use FXMaster special effects. And this is setting just who has access to this sidebar. All of these are and up. So with Assistant GM, it's just Assistant GM, and then everyone who has permissions above that, which would just be the Game Master. If you choose Trusted Player, it'll be Trusted Player, Assistant GM, and GM, etc. Player, obviously, then everyone would be able to access it. So everyone can mess with this. So that's just how you control that piece. The bottom setting here is disable effects for everybody. As the description lets you know, this is going to disable the effects for all of the users, and it's going to just completely ignore that the FXMaster flags are on the scenes. That's what's controlling all of this weather stuff. And it's basically just there for in case a migration goes wrong or something like that. So you generally don't need to worry about this, but it is there if you're having major issues and you need to go in and troubleshoot. Now, returning to the top, we have the custom animations folder. You can use this to specify a path where you're putting WebM files that you want to have accessible in the animations folder. So for example, when I go into my animation effects browser here, if I go to custom, I have pointed this to the Bailiwicky Towns module, and inside of that there's a folder with all these animate assets from the Gorgon, and these are all available for me within the animation effects management screen here, so I can see all of those. So you can specify whatever folder you want there. Whenever you add a folder here, or if you add things to the folder, for example, if you have, say, a user data, assets, and just animations folder, and you've added things to it, or if you install one of those animation modules that we mentioned earlier, you'll need to refresh the animations database. This also happens the very first time you install FXMaster, and anytime you update it, it will go ahead and redo this as well. But when you have this selected and you hit Save Changes, it's going to give you a notification here where it's beginning an animation scan and it is then going to search through, and you can see it's looking for all of the different animation modules you may have, and then it's going to be indexing all of the modules, and it's scanning those animation thumbnails, so it's going to tell you how many animations we've got and then how we're generating thumbnails. The thumbnails are generally just the first frame of the animation, though some have some specified thumbnails, etc. So this can take 5 to 10 minutes, depending upon just how many animations we're working with here. But you shouldn't need to do this super often, and like I said, it'll run automatically whenever you run FXMaster for the very first time or after you update it. So also be aware of that whenever you are updating FXMaster. If you are on a time crunch in the middle of a game or something like that, just be aware that you're going to have to wait the 5 to 10 minutes for this to finish. And you shouldn't interrupt it, and you shouldn't refresh or anything like that. It's good to go. And with that, that's going to conclude today's coverage on FXMaster, Foundry's 5th most popular module. Now, it's important to note that we said today's coverage, because Gambit, with his recent takeover, has done all kinds of great things to FXMaster already, but we know that he is not slowing down. He is still working on new features and refinement for the existing ones. So definitely keep an eye on this module and keep an eye on this channel for additional updates as we get them. FXMaster has had a wonderful life so far, and we know with Gambit it's in really good hands, and we can't wait to see what comes next. But that, of course, is just speaking for us here at Bailiwiki. Let us know in the comments what you think about all of these changes that Gambit has made, and whether FXMaster is an essential module in your eyes. If not, then tell us what modules you think are even more important to you that you think should have been higher up on that list of installed and most popular modules for Foundry. This has been Zephyr with the Bailiwiki channel, and if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest videos, and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, but you also gain access to all of the modular systems and scenes that we've made for Foundry VTT, like the ones that have been the backdrop for today's video. Again, it's been Zephyr. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.